Hello everybody and welcome to a different kind of video. I'm going to try out some new things now that we're getting closer to award season. We've gotten the Astra nominations, we've gotten a bunch of stuff. I've been watching so many big movies, I feel really caught up now. And I think we're definitely going to try some new kinds of videos. I think I'm going to do like a Golden Globe prediction video. I'm going to do a video like predicting the Oscar shortlists and stuff like that as we get into December. But for now, happy Thanksgiving. And I want to take a moment to just talk unscripted about a certain subject matter that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that is category confusion. I feel like every year there is at least one performance that people debate if it belongs in lead or supporting. And this year, I feel like we're getting a lot of that. But not so much like what we saw with Killers of the Flower Moon or Fabelmans, where a performance is campaigned lead and people feel like it belongs supporting. Rather, we're getting so many examples, like so many of these supporting actress contenders in particular this year really do feel like they belong in lead, or at least that there is a reasonable argument to be made that they belong in lead. Now, it started being this difficult thing because as I was checking off my own ballot, every time I would see someone who was a major supporting actress contender, I would be like, but are they really supporting though? And so as I started to fill out my actual supporting actress ballot, like there were a lot of big names that were missing that I had seen that other people were predicting that I was like, but I don't feel comfortable voting for them in supporting actress because I don't think they're supporting. And I mean, obviously there are some legitimately supporting performances that we'll get to. Obviously, like Selena Gomez and Emilia Perez, Isabella Rossellini in Conclave. No one's questioning those. People questioning if they do enough to get nominated, but at least they're definitely in the correct category. So I just sort of wanted to ramble unscripted. I think part of what makes this interesting is because for the past few years I've been so engraved in community theater and I've been doing a lot of acting. And when you do that, you sort of break down what makes a lead and what makes supporting. And you sort of, when you get a big role, you're like, ooh, would this count as a lead role? Does this count as supporting? And you got to factor in screen time, or stage time rather. How much time am I on stage versus off stage? But in case of a story, when you've been studying storytelling for a little while, there's a question of, okay, who is the protagonist? And can a story have more than one protagonist? And then you get into this whole very elaborate thing. But I think with a lot of these performances, there's interesting arguments to be made on either side. And so I'm actually going to start out by talking about performances that I do believe are correctly being placed in the supporting category, even though one could feasibly make an argument that the performance belongs in lead. And I'm going to start with Saoirse Ronan in Blitz. So this is a performance. The movie is divided into two separate storylines, one of her son and one of her. And I don't know the screen time breakdown, but it's reasonable to assume that the screen time breakdown might be close. And so you might watch the movie and think, okay, they're both lead. But my takeaway, even though Ronan has a lot of screen time, I don't think that's necessarily the factor. I think what I was really factoring in is who is the one moving the story forward? Who is the active character? Who is actually making the story happen? And I'm just going to reference last year very briefly. In the movie Nyad, Jodie Foster, she had a lot of screen time that might have debatably made her a co-lead. However, for that movie, Diana Nyad is the protagonist, and Jodie Foster is literally supporting her. And so it comes across that Foster is definitely playing a supporting character in that narrative, even if she does have a lot of screen time. Foster's character is not the one that moves that story forward. And so just to bring that to this year, with Blitz, now even though the two are separated, even though Saoirse Ronan and Elliot Hefferman are separated, Hefferman is really the one who progresses the narrative forward, because Hefferman is the one who decides to jump off that train and then spends the whole movie trying to get back to his mom. Now, of course, she's looking for him too, but she doesn't even realize that he's missing until over halfway through the narrative, and once she begins looking for him, nothing that she does directly impacts his story. He's still moving closer to her, and her actions really don't impact much of anything. And it could turn into a whole criticism of the movie, quite frankly. But I I ultimately don't. This is not an example where both characters are making the plot move forward. The heart of the narrative really is with the son, and it's his actions that are moving the plot forward, and her actions actually are a lot more passive than they might initially appear. So for that reason, I do think that Saoirse Ronan is playing a supporting character in Blitz, a very important character, but a supporting character nonetheless. So that's just one example, and you can feel free to disagree with me. Now, the next performance I want to talk about is from a movie that's not really in the awards conversation, and this particular performance is actually not in the awards conversation either, even though it deserves to be. I'm talking about Bridget Lundy Payne for I Saw the TV Glow. Finally caught up with this one, and in my personal opinion, it may be my favorite film of the year. Really, really, really good. And if you're just making your way through the Oscar contenders and you haven't caught up with this one, please see it. It's amazing. But in terms of like category confusion, so much of the movie is a two-hander between Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne. There's a lot of scenes of those two talking together, and when I say talking, it's mostly Bridget doing the talking because Justice's character is very quiet and doesn't talk as much. Also, the whole opening stretch of the movie, Justice Smith's character is actually played by a younger actor, and Bridget Lundy Payne is still playing her character at that very young age, which is honestly really shocking. I don't know how she pulls it off and is so convincing. But for those reasons, you could make the argument that these are two co-leads. Now, ultimately, the reason why I don't believe that, I think when you see the whole narrative put together, it really is Justice Smith's story. The whole thing is narrated by him and told from his character's perspective. Everything that we see in the film is told through Owen's POV, and that includes Bridget's character of Maddie. We only see Maddie from Owen's perspective. We don't see Maddie alone. Now, technically, there is that one scene near the end where Maddie's doing a very, very big monologue, and we only see a few cutaway shots of him throughout it. But still, I do think, at the end of the day, Justice Smith is the only true lead. And again, Bridget's character is very, very important to this narrative. But I don't think that this is not Maddie's story. This is Owen's story. I think because of the way the movie ends, it's just very, very wrapped up in one character's story. And if Bridget was seriously an awards conversation, and for what it's worth, Bridget was nominated for supporting actor by the Astra Midseason Awards because they are a non-binary performer, and even though they're playing a female character in this story, they're choosing to go by that direction. And either way, I don't think they stand much of a chance to be nominated because the film is so low profile, but if they were in contention, then it would be for supporting. So, with that out of the way, and please do see I Saw the TV Glow, it is my favorite film of the year. My second favorite film of the year I just recently saw, and that is Wicked. And everybody's talking about this movie for good reason. It's really, really extraordinary, and the fact they pulled it off is amazing. But let's not draw this out too long. Ariana Grande. Is she lead? Is she supporting? She's being campaign supporting, and not everyone agrees with that. Obviously, in the stage musical, both Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth were campaigned in lead actress, and so much of the marketing of the film has been around the two of them and around the pink and green, and you think of Elphaba and Glinda together when you think of this story, so naturally it would make sense to consider Ariana a co-lead. Well, I mean, if someone wanted to nominate Grande lead for their ballot, I wouldn't necessarily hate it, But I do think there are other performances that I'll get to later that are more deserving of the co-lead mantle, and I wasn't sure which way I would fall going into the film, but now having seen it, I do think Grande is supporting. It's very, very close. It's very close. But here's the argument. I think a lot of the new material that was added for the film is centered around Elphaba. It's interactions that Elphaba has with Dr. Dillamond and Madame Morrible and Nessa Rose, and there's some stuff with Glinda, but there's not really a ton of stuff with Glinda alone and not with Elphaba. And looking at the narrative structure of the film, you could argue that Wicked as a whole is about both of them, but because this is only telling the first half of that story, then this really is Elphaba's story, and it's Elphaba's arc culminating in Defying Gravity at the end of the film, seeing how she gets where she is at the start of the film to the end. This is all a bit confusing, I'm sorry. But when I walk away from Wicked, I'm really thinking about Elphaba more than I'm thinking about Glinda. Glinda is amazing, and Ariana Grande is spectacular in this role. But I do think that Elphaba really is the protagonist, and even though the relationship between Elphaba and Glinda is a very important part of the story, I think the real story is Elphaba's self-actualization and Elphaba going from where she is at the start of the film to realizing that she needs to take a stand. And that's the heart of the story. The Elphaba-Glinda relationship is very, very important, but I do believe that ultimately Glinda is a supporting character in Elphaba's story. A very important, I've said this before with both Ronan and Bridget Lundy Payne, like, these are important supporting characters. There's a reason why someone could make the argument for any of these contenders that they do belong in lead, but I'm personally going to stick with the argument that they're all supporting. Now, that does not mean I believe that every supporting contender should stay in supporting, because there's actually quite a few contenders that I believe should stay in lead, and what actually started this whole conversation was one of the very first movies that I saw in 2024, and that is Challengers. So Challengers is interesting. For the other movies, I've made the argument that they only have one lead. Challengers has 3 leads. I don't say that very often. It's actually very, very rare that I see a film as having more than 2 leads. Because you can very easily get into semantics with, like, ensemble pieces of, like, is everybody lead? But I think Challengers, the thing is that screenplay is so tight, and it's so laser focused on the 3 of them. Like, outside of those 3 characters, we barely even get to meet anybody else. And everything in the screenplay is dissecting the relationships between the 3 of them, and how one of them will feel about the other 2, and how the other 2 will feel about them, and it's like, I don't think you can make an argument. I think the initial marketing for the film was trying to make it look like Zendaya was the protagonist and the other 2 were supporting characters in her story. I don't think that's true. I don't even know if I could say definitively that Challengers has a protagonist. I think the protagonist is the 3 of them. The protagonist is the relationship that all 3 of them share with each other. And at the end of the movie, it really is about all 3. So this is a very good movie, and unfortunately, I don't know if it's in serious contention for any acting awards, and if it is, it would just be for Zendaya, because unfortunately, whether you put both Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist in supporting, or you put them both in lead, they do kind of cancel each other out, and it is really difficult to pick one over the other. Interestingly, the Astra Awards did choose to nominate Josh O'Connor in lead and Mike Feist in supporting, and I don't really know if I buy that. Again, I'd have to check the screen time data on that, but I really do think that ultimately this story is about the 3 of them. And whether you want to argue that one of them is more lead than the other, I don't think that. I think this is the very, very rare case in which 3 people are all the lead. Now, let's move on to the substance. So this, I think this is a two lead movie. Because ultimately the substance is about one central character, but that central character is played by two actresses. Elizabeth and Sue, even though the two of them may think that they're two different people, at the end of the day, they are one person. And as they say in the screenplay, respect the balance. I really do think that even though Demi Moore starts the narrative and she is the one that gets the ball rolling, once we switch over to Sue, it's not even like a question of who's the protagonist, of who has more narrative agency, because they both do, and technically speaking, they're both one character. Even if they forget it, they are both one character. And I just think when you take the whole collective narrative, this is like a Jekyll and Hyde story at the end of the day, and we are seeing one very complicated character arc as portrayed by two actresses. And I think specifically because of the way the third act is handled. And if you haven't seen The Substance yet, you might want to skip forward about 30 seconds. But because the film makes the narrative choice to have Demi Moore exit the movie a little early, once we get to the climax, that is all on Margaret Qualley. Like, she is responsible for that whole climax. Granted, she doesn't really look like herself for much of that climax, but it is still her. And to be fair, the very final moment of the movie is with Demi Moore, but Qualley does carry so much of that third act and so much of the film overall that really this lead role is shared between the two of them. So it does feel weird. I understand that Moore is the bigger name, and she has this narrative, this great comeback narrative, which is why she's being campaigned lead. And I wouldn't want to campaign her in supporting, don't get me wrong, but I believe this is one of those examples where the screen time data has been released, and they're basically the same. Like, it would feel very, very odd to nominate Qualley in supporting and Moore for lead, which I think could happen because the movie really is catching on like wildfire right now. But yeah, I think the two of them share the lead role, and I think they both would deserve a lead nomination. Now, one movie that I haven't heard a whole lot of people talk about in regards to category confusion, which is actually confusing me a little bit, is The Piano Lesson. So I walked away from this movie thinking, I'm pretty sure Daniel Deadwyler is a co-lead of this movie. And it's kind of surprising because unlike most examples on this list, the person who is the other co-lead of the movie is John David Washington. So the two of them would be competing in separate categories, so I don't know why they can't just campaign both of them in lead. Now, if you've seen the movie, the whole central conceit of the film, if you want to talk about who is the protagonist, who makes the plot happen, I don't know if this story has a clear-cut protagonist. The story is really about this family trying to make this decision of, do we sell the piano or not? And John David Washington is the character who is the most adamant that they should sell the piano, and Daniel Deadwyler is the one who is the most adamant that they should not sell the piano. And every other character around them is supporting, and they have the various degrees of whether they side with one or the other. But the whole reason the plot of the movie happens is because of the conflict between Washington's character and Deadwyler's character. And the two do go back and forth, and maybe at certain points you are supposed to wonder which side of the conflict is the correct one, but certainly the more the movie goes on, the more you really do, at least for me, the more I sided with Deadwyler. And also, I was just more pulled in by her performance. So maybe this is a little bit of bias because I was generally paying more attention when she was on screen as opposed to when he was on screen. But I feel like if you broke down the screen time for this one, it wouldn't be that different. And the more the film went on, the more I really felt that Deadwyler really is the heart of this movie. I'm not saying that John David Washington is supporting by any means. I do think he's also lead, but I do think that they're both co-leads, and I do think that it is the conflict between those two characters that causes everything that happens in the movie to happen. And when we get to the big climactic moment of the film, it's all on her. Like, she is the reason why the conflict gets resolved at the end. And I know that the movie like starts with Washington and in the end it ends with Washington. And I'm not saying that Washington, I think Washington and Deadweiler are both co-leads. And Deadweiler is one of several examples, as you'll see, in supporting actress that I don't think is supporting. And understandably, Best Lead Actress is a little tight right now, so if you put her in supporting, then she has a better chance at being nominated. But unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Now, there's two performances in particular that everyone has really been talking about in terms of category fraud, because it's two performances that people think could potentially win the two supporting acting categories. And they are Zoe Saldana for Amelia Perez and Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain. Now, in the case of Saldana, I will admit, looking at the screen time data, I see that Saldana has slightly more screen time than Carla Sofia Gascon. However, I still do walk away with the interpretation that Gascon is the true protagonist. Gascon is really the central character and the one that gets everything going, but the thing is, it's like I almost see the argument for putting Saldana in supporting. I can almost see it because Gascon does take up so much. Gascon really is the center of the narrative in the middle. Of course, the beginning act of the movie is entirely told from Saldana's point of view, and when we get to the end, Saldana kind of takes over again. So much of the middle is about Gascon, but Saldana is always there. And even if... Now, you could make the argument that Saldana is kind of playing a supporting role in Amelia Perez's story, but yeah, she does open the movie, and she does close the movie, and she's there pretty consistently in the middle, including her big Al Mal number right in the middle of the film. So, yeah, I can, like, almost see the argument that she's supporting, but I feel like she's in too much of the film. The simple fact that she has more screen time than Gascon, and, of course, this is the classic trick. If you ever want to tell... If you changed Zoe Saldana's character into a man, then that character would be put in lead actor. Like, if the two of them didn't have to worry about competing for the same category, then you could very easily put them both in lead. And so at the end of the day, I do think Saldana is a co-lead, although I do think her performance is perhaps not as impressive as what Gascon is doing, and I do understand from a strategic perspective why they decided to put her in supporting. But it's not a placement that I agree with, and unfortunately it does leave the supporting actress lineup with a bunch of women who are all kind of co-leads. However, I do want to take this final moment to talk about a man for once. Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain. I saw this movie fairly recently, and yeah, he's a lead. This one is kind of undeniable. I don't really think you can make much of a case, because the whole movie is just Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, Culkin does have more dialogue and is playing the bigger, louder character, and Eisenberg is sort of the audience surrogate, and there is like a very brief section in the middle where Eisenberg is alone, but most of the movie is the two of them playing off of each other. And while I think, yeah, even though Eisenberg is the audience surrogate, we are supposed to latch on to... Funnily enough, it's the exact opposite of the Amelia Perez situation, because in that movie, Saldana's character is the audience surrogate, and Gascon's character is the person that we're all taking an interest in. Here, it's the reverse. In a Real Pain, Eisenberg is the audience surrogate, and Culkin is the one that the story's really about. So it just feels wrong to put Culkin in supporting. And I've said this on multiple occasions now. If Kieran Culkin were being campaigned in lead actor for A Real Pain, he would get nominated. Because if you look at that top 5 for Best Actor, we know that Adrian Brody, Timothée Chalamet, Ray Fiennes, and Coleman Domingo, they're all locked in, and that 5th slot is wide open. Like, throw a dart and you'll hit a contender. And so there is still a part of me that wonders if the Academy's going to do like a Kate Winslet for the Reader thing, or a reverse Lakeith Stanfield, where they nominate Kieran Culkin in the correct category, because there is room for him. Like, there is a big, big spot, and I don't know who else is going to get the support they need to get that 5th slot. So maybe he could end up getting the nomination at the end of the day anyway, although, yeah, you never want to intentionally bet on that, because it's always a surprise when it happens. So what is the takeaway from all this? It's funny, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how usually in years like this, there's one movie that's with, like, usually it's like a heterosexual romance that has a male and female lead that's being campaigned. And I tried to think, and I don't really know if we have one this year, unless you want to count, like, We Live in Time, but that movie I don't think is in serious consideration. So I was like, man, do we not have any movies there where both of the leads are being campaigned in lead? And then I was like, oh yeah, The Room Next Door. I totally forgot about that one, but that is the very, very rare example where the studio did campaign 2 leads of the same gender in lead. And it's really impressive that they actually did it. I don't know if they're gonna get nominated, but from what I've heard, I haven't seen the movie yet, although I do have the screener. From what I've heard, the person of the 2 of them with the better chance of being nominated is Tilda Swinton, even though her character is the one that people thought was going to go supporting. So kind of like, yeah, she's the Kieran Culkin of that category, and if she does get nominated in lead, it'll be tricky, because lead actress is a lot more full than lead actor. But I'm very, very happy that a studio had the guts to actually do it. And I hope that more studios continue to go forward. Continue to be like, no, you know what? Our movie has 2 leads, and we're proud that our movie has 2 leads. So I don't know if I've said this at the beginning or not, but the last time a movie with 2 leads of the same gender got nominated, where both of them got nominated in lead, was Thelma and Louise. And that was 1991, so it was quite a while ago. I don't know if it's ever going to happen again, and we've seen some pretty ridiculous examples of category fraud, but maybe one day the studios will wise up and be like, you know what, this movie has 2 leads, and we're gonna, yeah. So this was kind of rambling. I don't know if you have any opinions on any of the performances I mentioned, about whether you feel they're lead or supporting. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments down below, and I'm working on my next video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Take care.